My name is Charlotte Walker. I'm 42 years old and live alone in a quiet cedar cabin in the hills of Vermont. It's not isolated just enough to be peaceful. 5 years ago, I sold the rights to my first novel and made $2 million overnight. It should have been the happiest time of my life. But somehow I felt lonelier than ever. There was one person I wanted to call when I saw that wire transfer hit my account. Not my agent, not even my best friend. I wanted to call my grandfather Paul Walker. He was the only one who ever believed I could be a writer. But he was gone. He died 5 years ago, just a few days after telling me how proud he was. Heart attack, they said. Sudden, tragic. But something about that night never sat right with me. When the phone rang 2 weeks ago, I didn't recognize the number. It was my mother. Charlotte. She said, her voice low but warm. Your father's throwing a small dinner next weekend. Just family. It'll be 5 years since we lost Grandpa.
He'd want you there.
I hesitated. It had been almost 4 years since I last set foot in that house. My father and I weren't close. We never were. He always said I was too soft, too sensitive, too much like my mother. But he tolerated me once I became successful. Still, I agreed to come mostly for her. Tonight is that night. As I stood in front of my bathroom mirror adjusting the silver necklace Grandpa gave me for my college graduation, my stomach churned. I put on a soft navy blue sweater and dark jeans. Simple, comfortable, nothing flashy. Grandpa always said wealth should be quiet. I looked at myself in the mirror. The lines on my face seemed deeper than they were a year ago. Was it age or something else? Anxiety, maybe. Something old was stirring inside me. Something I had buried. The drive to the family farmhouse took just over 2 hours. The sun was setting behind the hills, casting a golden glow over the pastures. I used to run through those fields barefoot as a child. It used to feel like freedom. Now it felt like something else, like the edge of a memory I didn't want to remember. The house looked the same, white wood siding, green shutters, the wraparound porch that always creaked in the wind. My mother opened the door before I even knocked. Charlotte, she smiled, pulling me into her arms. You look tired, sweetheart. Long drive, I replied, forcing a smile. The smell of roast chicken and rosemary filled the air. She had set the table with her best china. Only 6 seats, my parents, me, Aunt Claire, her husband George, and my younger cousin Natalie. But I wasn't focused on the food or the table or the guests. I saw him standing at the end of the hall, my father. Richard Walker was a strong-looking man even at 68. Broad shoulders, clean-shaven, always impeccably dressed. Tonight, he wore a dark burgundy sweater and gray slacks. He held a glass of wine in his hand, swirling it slowly. He smiled when he saw me. Charlotte, he said, walking over. Millionaire daughter back from her fortress of solitude. Dad, I said, keeping my tone neutral. He kissed my cheek. I could smell the Cabernet on his breath. We sat for dinner. Conversation was light weather books, local politics. Natalie talked about switching majors again. Aunt Claire told the same story she always tells about her honeymoon in Maine. But my father said little. He just watched and smiled. After dessert, my father stood and walked into the kitchen. When he returned, he carried 2 glasses of red wine. One for you, he said, placing a glass in front of me. And one for me. What's the occasion, I asked. To success, he replied. To my brilliant daughter. He raised his glass. You deserve this. Special. He emphasized that word. Special. I forced a smile. My fingers wrapped around the stem of the glass, but I didn't lift it. Something was wrong. Something about the way he looked at me. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, not pride, not joy. Something else. Calculation. I excused myself to get a napkin from the kitchen. As I bent over near the table, I acted as if I had dropped my earring. No one paid much attention. In that brief moment, I switched our glasses. The same deep red wine, the same etched pattern on the crystal. No one noticed, except me. I returned to my seat and took a small sip from the glass, now his. He watched me closely. Rich, you all right? My mother asked. Never better, he said, smiling wide. His eyes stayed locked on mine. For a moment, I almost believed he was proud of me. Almost. 30 minutes passed. The conversation drifted to family vacation memories. My aunt laughed at something George said. Natalie got up to show us pictures of her new puppy. Then I heard a short, sharp breath. I turned. My father's face had gone pale. His hand clutched his chest. His eyes widened. He staggered slightly, knocking over the wine glass. It hit the floor and shattered. "Richard," my mother called out, rushing toward him. He collapsed to the ground. Time stopped, and in that frozen moment, I knew one thing for certain: that glass was meant for me. I sat alone on the porch swing that night, long after the ambulance took my father away. My mother was inside calling the hospital. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves of the old oak trees that lined the backyard. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The sound reminded me of nights from my childhood, quiet, eerie, but oddly comforting. Back then, this farm was a different place. It felt warm, alive, safe, mostly because of him. Grandpa Paul. He was my anchor in a home that often felt cold. My father was never cruel in the way some men are. He didn't yell or throw things. He didn't drink. But his silence hurt more than shouting. He believed emotions were weaknesses, and that daughters were a disappointment unless they acted like sons. He never read my stories, never came to a school play, never hugged me unless it was for a photo. When I cried over my first heartbreak at 16, he said, "You need thicker skin, Charlotte. This world's not built for people like you." But Grandpa was different. Every Friday, he'd pick me up from school in his rusty old pickup and take me to the orchard. We'd sit on overturned crates drinking apple cider while I read him chapters of whatever I was working on that week. He always listened, always smiled. "You've got a real gift, Charlie," he used to say. "One day people are going to pay to read your words. You wait and see." He believed in me when no one else did. I remember his hands, the most rough and cracked from decades of farming, but always gentle when he turned the pages of my notebooks. I used to think he was invincible, until he wasn't. It was 5 years ago, just a few weeks after I signed my first book deal. The publisher sent in advance more than I had ever dreamed of. I called Grandpa the same night. He didn't answer. The next day, my mother called instead. Her voice was hollow. "He's gone, Charlotte. Grandpa had a heart attack last night. In his sleep." I dropped the phone. I remember that moment as clearly as if it just happened. The sound of the phone hitting the floor, the cold hardwood beneath my knees, the silence that swallowed me whole. They said it happened after a family dinner, just a regular evening. He had wine with Dad, talked about the future of the farm, went to bed, never woke up. The funeral was a blur. I remember standing by the casket staring at his still hands. They didn't look right. Too still. Too cold. I half expected him to open his eyes and wink at me, but he didn't. I stayed at the house for 2 days after the funeral. I wanted to help my mother maybe go through Grandpa's things, but my father didn't want that. "He's gone, Charlotte. Let the man rest," he said, shutting the door to Grandpa's study. I left Vermont the next morning and didn't come back for years. But something had always bothered me. It was the last conversation I had with Grandpa. He called me a few days before that dinner. I told him about the publishing deal. He sounded so proud. Then he lowered his voice and said something strange. "Listen, Charlie, if anything ever happens to me, there's a notebook in the bottom drawer of my desk. Leather bound. You'll know it when you see it." I asked him why he was saying that. He laughed it off. Just an old man being sentimental, I guess. But he never got sentimental. Not without reason. After his death, I searched for that notebook the day before I left, but the desk was locked. My father said the key was lost. "Let it go, Charlotte," he told me. "Grandpa didn't leave behind secrets, just dirt and debts." But I remembered something else. At that dinner, Grandpa didn't pour his own wine. My father did. He stood up that night like he did earlier tonight and offered a toast. To my father, he said, "The man who built this place." He poured 2 glasses. I was in the kitchen with my mother helping with the dishes. I only saw it from the hallway. But the way Grandpa looked at the glass before sipping it, it wasn't joy. It was something else. Hesitation. I convinced myself I was imagining things, that I was reading too much into it, that my father, despite everything, wouldn't hurt his own father. But now I wasn't so sure. He said the same line to me tonight, to my millionaire daughter. He handed me a glass. He smiled the same smile. And 30 minutes later, he collapsed the same way Grandpa did. Was it just coincidence? I looked up from the porch swing. The barn light had gone out. The wind was colder now. I thought about that night 5 years ago again. My father called me the day after Grandpa died. His voice was calm. "Charlotte, I took care of the paperwork. Grandpa left everything to your name. You don't need to worry about anything." I was confused. Everything he said, the will had been updated a month before Grandpa died. My name was now listed as the sole inheritor of the farm. I hadn't expected that, but something didn't add up. If my father knew I was inheriting the land, why was he so calm? Wouldn't that make him angry? Unless he had a plan, unless he thought I wouldn't live long enough to claim it. That thought hit me like a cold wave. Suddenly, my success wasn't something to be proud of. It was a threat, an obstacle. I stood up from the swing and walked back inside. My mother was still on the phone, her voice low and shaking. I quietly made my way to the den. The old wooden desk where Grandpa used to sit was still there, still locked, but I knew somehow that notebook was still inside, and I was going to find it. The house was silent when I walked back in, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the low murmur of my mother's voice from the other room. She was still on the phone with the hospital. I could hear the words faintly through the wall. They're monitoring his heart rate. He's stable, but they don't know why he collapsed. Her voice cracked on the word collapsed. I moved slowly, making my way past the dining room. The smell of roast chicken still lingered in the air, but the table was a mess now. Plates half full, napkins, crumpled glasses smeared with fingerprints. Only one thing was missing: the glass my father had handed me, the one I had switched. I walked back to the table, my eyes scanning the floor until I saw the shards of glass near the fireplace rug. It must have slipped from his hand when he fell. The wine had splattered onto the floor like blood. I took a deep breath, careful not to step on the glass, and crouched beside the broken pieces. There, nestled between the fibers of the rug, I found it a small puddle of red still wet. I pulled a plastic zip bag from my purse, a habit from years of traveling and organizing, now a tool for something far more serious. I used a spoon from the kitchen to collect a few drops and sealed them inside. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, only that my instincts screamed louder than my fear. That wine was not normal. I placed the bag inside my coat pocket and turned off the light. Upstairs, I found my old bedroom just as I had left it: the same bookshelf, the same lavender curtains, even the same quilt my grandmother made when I was 12. It felt like walking into a memory frozen in time. I sat on the edge of the bed, the sample still in my hands, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Had my father really tried to poison me? It seemed impossible, absurd. But the pattern was too similar. The glass of wine, the mysterious toast, the sudden collapse, first Grandpa, now him. And there was something else, something I had buried for years. The memory came back sharper now. 5 years ago, after Grandpa died, I had overheard something late at night. My father was on the phone in his office. I couldn't hear every word, just fragments enough to freeze me in place outside the door. I know the will is solid. She doesn't even know yet. It'll take care of the debt. Debt. I never forgot that word. My father always presented himself as stable, practical, good with money, but that night his tone was frantic, desperate. What debt? Who was he talking to? And if Grandpa left everything to me, what did that mean for him? He said I didn't need to worry about the inheritance, that he would handle it until I was ready. I didn't argue at the time. I was grieving. I didn't want to think about legal documents or taxes, but now it all felt like a setup. I turned off the lamp and lay down, still fully dressed. My heart thudded against my ribs. I didn't sleep. I watched the shadows stretch across the ceiling as the hours passed. In the morning, I found my mother in the kitchen, staring into a cup of untouched tea. Her eyes were red. She looked older than I remembered, fragile, but not broken. "How is he?" I asked. "They kept him overnight." She paused. "They said it wasn't a heart attack, but they don't know what it was. He just collapsed. His blood pressure dropped. His heart rate spiked. It looked like a reaction to something, but they haven't identified what." I nodded slowly. Did you drink the wine last night? She asked suddenly. Her voice was quiet but sharp. I looked at her. No. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. I thought so. I wanted to tell her what I suspected, but I didn't. Not yet. Not until I had something concrete. Instead, I asked, "Do you remember the night Grandpa died?" She looked away. Of course I do. Did he drink anything? Anything unusual? She hesitated, then said, "Your father poured him a glass of wine, just like last night. I remember thinking how strange it was. Your grandfather didn't usually drink that late, and he didn't like that vintage, but he drank it anyway. Did he seem off before he went to bed?" She swallowed hard. Yes, a little dizzy, tired. He said he needed to lie down. And then she didn't finish the sentence. I sat down beside her. Mom, what if I told you that I think Dad gave me something last night, something in that wine? She turned to me, her face pale. Her lips parted as if to deny it, but no words came. I didn't drink it, I said. I switched glasses with him. He drank what was meant for me. The room was quiet. She reached out and grabbed my hand. It trembled in hers. Do you think he meant to hurt you? I don't know, I said, but I'm going to find out. She nodded slowly, then said something that made my blood run cold. Your grandfather said something to me once. A few weeks before he died, he told me if anything happens to me, look for my journal. It's all in there. Where is it? I don't know. I looked after he died. Your father said he threw it out, said it was filled with ramblings and shouldn't be kept. He lied. She looked at me. What are you going to do? I stood. I'm going to test that wine. And then I'm going to find Grandpa's journal. I think the answers are all here. They've been here this whole time. She didn't say anything. But as I walked out of the kitchen, I felt her eyes on me full of fear, but also something else, hope. The hospital called that evening. Your father is awake, the nurse said. But he's disoriented. His vitals are stable, but we're still running tests. We don't have a clear cause yet. You might want to come in. I said I'd think about it. But I already knew the answer. I wasn't going. Not until I understood what he had done. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching local labs. Not government-affiliated, not high-profile, just quiet, independent places that wouldn't ask too many questions. One lab caught my eye, Harrison Toxicology Services, just outside Burlington. Small, reputable, and confidential. I called immediately. I need a wine sample tested for sedatives or unusual substances, I said. Can you do that? The woman on the other end sounded calm. Of course. Just bring the sample in person. We don't accept anything by mail. Perfect, I replied. I'll be there in the morning. I ended the call and walked to the coat closet. The plastic bag with the wine sample was exactly where I had left it. I wrapped it carefully in a scarf, placed it in a lunchbox, and tucked it into my purse. Outside, the sky had turned dark gray. Wind swept through the trees with a low hiss. It felt like the beginning of a storm, though the air was still. Upstairs, I heard my mother moving through the hallway. I found her in Grandpa's old study. She had opened the desk drawers. Any luck, I asked. Nothing yet, but I know he wouldn't have thrown it away. She sat on the floor flipping through an old box filled with receipts and envelopes. Her hands trembled slightly. He was so careful with his words, she said quietly. Your grandfather. He never said something unless it mattered. If he told you to find his journal, it means there's something in it, something important. I nodded. I'm taking the wine to a lab tomorrow. I need proof, not just feelings. She looked at me. Do you think he did the same thing to Grandpa? I didn't answer. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed holding my grandfather's old pocket watch. He'd given it to me the day I graduated college. Time reveals everything, Charlie, he'd said. Sometimes you just have to wait and listen. I'd never truly understood what he meant until now. The next morning, I left just after sunrise. The roads were quiet, the trees dusted with frost. I drove with the windows cracked open, letting the cold air keep me alert. 2 hours later, I arrived at the lab, a small brick building tucked behind a medical plaza. A woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair met me at the front desk. Thick glasses, soft voice, no small talk. "You're Ms. Walker?" "Yes." She took the sample without a word, labeling it and sealing it in a second bag. "How fast do you need the results?" "As fast as you can," I said. "It's urgent." She nodded. "We'll call you in 3 days. That's the best we can do." I thanked her and left. On the drive back, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. "He's asking for you," she said. "Your father." "Why?" She hesitated. "He says he wants to apologize, says he made a mistake." I stayed silent for a long moment, watching the trees blur past the window. "Tell him I'm not ready," I said. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed everything in my head, his words, his expression, the way he smiled at me before handing me the wine. "To my millionaire daughter." And that word again, special. Why emphasize that? Unless he wanted me to notice. Unless part of him wanted me to suspect something but not say it out loud. That was always his way. No direct conflict, just suggestion, manipulation, quiet control. He never hit me. He didn't need to. He used silence like a weapon. 3 days passed like molasses. Every hour dragged. Every minute felt like glass scraping against my skin. My mother kept asking if I was okay. I said yes, but I wasn't. Then the call came. "This is Dr. Porter from Harrison Toxicology. We have your results." My hands tightened around the phone. And she paused. There were unusually high levels of phenobarbital in that sample. Phenobarbital, a strong sedative. In small amounts, it causes drowsiness and confusion. But in the concentration found in your sample, it could cause unconsciousness. Possibly worse, depending on the person's health. Would it... I swallowed. Would it be fatal to someone older? With heart issues? Possibly. Yes. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. "Thank you," I whispered. "We'll email you the full report. If you need it, certified for legal purposes, just let us know." I hung up and stood in silence. It was real. It wasn't in my head, it wasn't paranoia, it wasn't coincidence. He had drugged the wine, and he had handed it to me, deliberately. I pulled up a chair and sat down, the weight of it all sinking in. He tried to do it again. First Grandpa, now me. But this time, I switched the glasses. This time he drank it himself. I stared at the lab report for a long time before printing it. 5 pages of data graphs terminology, most of it too technical to fully understand, but one sentence stood out, bolded and underlined by the technician. "High concentration of phenobarbital consistent with deliberate sedative exposure." Deliberate. I folded the report and slid it into a folder. My hands were still shaking. A part of me had wanted the test to come back clean, because if it had, I could convince myself I was wrong, that maybe I'd misjudged him, that maybe my father, despite everything, was still just a complicated man. But now, he wasn't just a controlling parent or a cold presence. He was a man who had tried to drug his own daughter. I sat in the car outside the house for a long time before going in. My mother was in the kitchen folding laundry she hadn't touched in weeks. "You're pale," she said quietly. I nodded and placed the folder on the table. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the report. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "He really did it," she finally whispered. "He did." She sat down, eyes fixed on the page. My God. There was a long silence. The only sound was the tick of the old wall clock above the sink. "It belonged to Grandpa. He used to wind it every morning at 6 a.m. sharp. I think he did it to your grandfather too," I said. She looked up. There was no disbelief in her face, only sorrow. "Why now?" she asked. "Why try again? Because I have money. Because I have no husband. No children. If I died, he'd inherit everything." My mother's face twisted in pain, like she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. "I think he's been planning this for a while," I continued. "And I think Grandpa saw it coming. He told me about a leather journal in his desk drawer, said to find it if anything ever happened. Your father told me he threw it away," she said. "Said it was nothing but old ramblings. I don't think he did. I think he kept it, hid it." Together we went into Grandpa's old study. The air was stale like dust and memory. We pulled open every drawer, emptied old boxes, searched behind bookshelves. Hours passed. The sun began to dip behind the trees. Then, in the back of the closet behind a stack of old tax documents, we found a small wooden chest. Inside was a black leather journal. My mother gasped. It was worn, the leather cracked at the spine, the pages slightly yellowed. Grandpa's handwriting was still strong, slanted, neat, purposeful. I flipped through slowly. Most entries were about the farm: weather updates, harvest notes, small family anecdotes. But then halfway through, the tone shifted. "I'm starting to worry about Richard," one entry began. "He's been acting strange, distant, secretive. I asked him if he needed help with the farm's finances, and he snapped at me, said I was interfering." Another entry, a few days later: "Last night we drank wine together. He offered me a glass from his private stash. Said it was a gift. I felt dizzy afterward, weak. Elaine thought it was nothing, but I know my body. Something wasn't right." Then the final page: "If something happens to me, if I die, suddenly don't assume it was natural. Look deeper and tell Charlotte I'm proud of her, no matter what anyone says." I stopped reading. My hands were shaking again. My mother sat beside me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew Richard was dangerous." I closed the journal. "We have to do more than read this." "What do you mean we need proof, Mom?" "From that time, from his death. We need to reopen the records, maybe even get a court order for an autopsy." Her eyes widened. "You want to exhume your grandfather?" I hesitated. "I want justice, and I want to know. I can't live not knowing anymore." She nodded slowly, the pain in her face now hardening into something else. "Resolve. Then we'll do it," she said. "I'll stand by you." I called an old friend from college now, a criminal defense attorney in New Hampshire. Her name was Anna Baird. She didn't hesitate. "This sounds insane, Charlotte, but not impossible. If you have the lab report and the journal, that's already something. I'll help you petition for a court order, but you'll also need someone to re-examine the medical files from his death." She connected us with a private investigator, Marcus Harris, who specialized in forensic family cases. I emailed him the lab report and photos of Grandpa's journal entries. He called me the next morning. "This smells bad," he said. "If you're willing to go all the way, I'll dig." And that's how it began. Within a week, we filed for a motion to exhume my grandfather's body. It took time and some resistance from the county office, but Anna was relentless. My mother signed a sworn affidavit. The journal was submitted as part of the petition. Finally, the approval came. The exhumation happened under gray skies and cold wind. Quiet, respectful, painful. I stood beside my mother as they unearthed the casket. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We just held hands. Inside the small on-site lab, the forensic examiner took samples from the tissue that remained bones and teeth. "It'll take a few days," he said, "but if there's any trace of sedatives, we'll find them." That night, back in my room, I looked through the last few pages of Grandpa's journal again. One sentence kept jumping out at me. "Don't assume it was natural." I hadn't. Not anymore. Now I was going to find out the truth, whatever it cost. The call came 5 days later, just after dawn. I was standing in the kitchen, stirring a pot of oatmeal I no longer wanted. My phone buzzed once, then again. "Unknown number." I answered on the second ring. "Miss Walker, this is Dr. Lionel from the Burlington Forensic Pathology Department. You filed for a re-examination of Paul Walker's remains. We have your results." I gripped the counter. "Yes." There was a long pause, like he was choosing his words carefully. "We ran a full toxicology panel on all preserved tissue and bone marrow samples. As expected, there was mild natural deterioration, but we also detected residual traces of a sedative compound, specifically a barbiturate derivative related to phenobarbital. Not naturally occurring, not part of any known prescription your grandfather was taking." My stomach sank. Would that have caused his death? In the concentration we found, yes. It would have caused severe drowsiness, respiratory depression, and in someone his age, possibly cardiac arrest. It wasn't a heart attack, not in the traditional sense. It was drug-induced failure. I couldn't speak. "We'll send over the full report within the hour. If you choose to pursue legal action, the findings are admissible. I'm very sorry for your loss again." I hung up, still frozen. He had done it. My father had killed his own father. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the wood grain for a long time. The wind outside was steady now, brushing the porch like a soft warning. The same wind that had blown through the trees the night Grandpa died. The same wind I'd heard the night my father collapsed. I felt its weight in my chest. "Mom," I said. She was coming down the stairs, still in her robe. "What is it?" I held out the phone with the lab report now on screen. She read it slowly. Her lips trembled. Her eyes moved back and forth over the same paragraph over and over. "He killed him," she whispered. "He really did it." I nodded. "Why, Charlotte? Why would he do that?" "Because he was drowning," I said. "Grandpa wouldn't bail him out financially. And when he realized Grandpa left the farm to me, that was the final push." My mother sat down, her hands in her lap. "All those years, I slept next to him. I cooked his meals. I believed every word he told me. I defended him to you when you were a teenager. I told you he was just strict, that he loved in his own way." Her voice broke. I didn't know I was living with a man capable of this. I sat beside her. He manipulated everyone I said. He made us all doubt ourselves. That's what men like him do. But he left cracks behind, and now we've seen through them. She looked up at me. "What are we going to do?" "I've already started. I talked to Anna and Marcus. The evidence is strong, too strong to ignore. We have the wine lab report, Grandpa's journal, and now the toxicology results." She nodded slowly, tears on her cheeks. "I want justice, Charlotte, not just for your grandfather, but for you, for me." We filed a full report with local law enforcement the next day. It was surreal handing over a folder that essentially accused my father of murdering one family member and attempting to drug another. The detectives were skeptical at first until they saw the documents. Once they read Grandpa's journal and the lab analysis from both the wine and the exhumation, their expressions changed. "We'll need to bring him in for questioning," the lead investigator said. "Is he still at the hospital?" "He's recovering at home now," I replied. "But I don't think he suspects we know." A week later, they brought him in. I didn't go to the station that day. I didn't want to hear his voice. Didn't want to see him spin his lies, act confused, deflect blame. I knew he'd do all of that. But they didn't need my presence. They had the evidence. That night, I sat on the back porch while my mother cooked inside. I sipped a cup of chamomile tea and watched the sky change colors, blue to amber, amber to gray. Then my phone buzzed. It was Anna. He denied everything she said, claimed he had no idea what was in the wine, blamed old age, confusion. But when they brought up Grandpa's case and showed him the toxicology report, he stopped talking. They pressed him on the journal. He said he'd never seen it. Then he asked for a lawyer. I leaned back into the chair. "Will it be enough?" "It's more than enough," she said. "He's looking at multiple charges: manslaughter or second-degree murder for your grandfather, attempted murder for you, possibly fraud or financial abuse depending on what they find in the will and inheritance documents." A pause. "Are you okay?" "No," I said, "but I'm getting there." After I hung up, I watched the stars blink into view. I hadn't noticed them in years. Too busy, too distracted, too afraid. But now I noticed everything. Later, my mother joined me. "You remember when you were 10 and Grandpa took you to that book fair in Montpelier?" she asked suddenly. I nodded. He bought me a spiral notebook and said, "Fill it with truth." She smiled faintly. "You did." We sat in silence after that. There wasn't much left to say. The truth had finally surfaced, and it didn't bring relief, not yet. Just stillness, grief, and something deeper resolve. My father had built a life out of shadows, but he left one crack too many, and I had walked through it. The sky was steel gray when I walked up the porch steps of the farmhouse. The wind had picked up, and the trees groaned under the weight of coming rain. I hadn't been here since the night of the dinner, since the night he collapsed. But now I wasn't here as a daughter. I was here as someone demanding answers. My father was back home. The hospital discharged him 2 days ago, saying he was stable enough to recover in his own bed. But he hadn't called. Not once. Not to apologize. not to explain, just silence. I pushed open the front door. It wasn't locked. My mother stood at the kitchen sink washing a bowl. She turned when she heard me. "He's in the den," she said quietly. "He knows you're coming." I nodded and stepped inside. The house felt smaller than I remembered, as if the walls had closed in under the weight of all the years we never talked. I passed the photographs on the hallway wall, birthdays, family reunions, old Christmas mornings. His face was in every frame, always stiff, always distant. I had never noticed that before, but now I saw it clearly. I stepped into the den. My father sat in his usual armchair by the fireplace, a blanket over his lap. He looked thinner, older, but his eyes were still sharp. Too sharp. He didn't smile. Charlotte. I didn't sit. I laid the folder on the table in front of him. It was thick now. The wine lab report, the autopsy results, Grandpa's journal, printed emails from the investigator. He glanced at it, then leaned back. "So you've decided to believe ghosts over your own father?" "No," I said. "I've decided to believe science and the truth." He said nothing. I looked at him, really looked. The man who had raised me with coldness. The man who stood by when I cried, who belittled my dreams, who smiled when I finally succeeded. But only because he thought he could take it from me. Why, I asked. My voice was calm, but inside I was shaking. "Why would you do this?" He stared into the empty fireplace. His hands trembled slightly on the armrest. "I didn't mean for any of it to happen the way it did," he said finally. "I was drowning. Your grandfather cut me out of the will. He gave the land to you. Said I wasn't fit to run it. Said I didn't respect the soil. You didn't," I said. He ignored me. "And then you were supposed to be a phase. That writing thing. That book. But it sold. And then came the money. And the attention. Suddenly you had everything. And you hated it," I said, "because you didn't control it." He turned to me, his voice rising for the first time. "I gave you everything. A roof, an education, and what did I get? You turned your back on me." I swallowed hard. "You tried to kill me," I said, "just like you killed Grandpa." He didn't respond, just looked away again. "You poisoned him," I continued. "I have the toxicology results. The sedative in his system was the same one that showed up in your glass. You tried to do it the same way, only this time I didn't drink it. You did?" Still he didn't speak. I picked up the journal and flipped to the last entry. He offered me wine I read aloud. I felt dizzy, weak. "If something happens to me, don't assume it was natural." I paused. He knew. "And you knew that someday I might find this. That's why you kept it hidden." He closed his eyes for a long moment. "I wasn't going to kill you," he muttered. I laughed, bitter and hollow. "You gave me a sedative strong enough to stop a man's heart, just enough to knock you out. I was going to have you sign a transfer. The house, the land, your account. I figured you'd think it was a side effect, a fainting spell. But once it was done, you'd be too ashamed to press charges. You thought I'd cover it up. You always have. Every time I said something cruel, every time I ignored your stories. You excused it. Not anymore." He looked at me, then really looked, and for a brief second, I saw something close to fear in his eyes. "You're going to the police, aren't you?" "Already did." He slumped back in the chair. "They'll never convict." I reached into the folder and pulled out the photocopy of Grandpa's journal. One page had his handwriting, the other a typed transcript. Below it, the autopsy findings. It was all laid out chronologically clearly. They already filed charges. He didn't speak. "You don't have to say anything else," I said. "But I needed to look you in the eye before this ends. I needed to see if there was a shred of humanity left." And nothing. Just an empty shell. He didn't deny it. The knock came at the door 15 minutes later. 2 officers stepped inside. One read him his rights, while the other secured his hands with cuffs. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. As they led him out of the house, he turned once to look at me. But I didn't flinch. I watched the door close behind him, and then he was gone. My mother stood beside me silent, her eyes shining. We stood in the quiet hallway surrounded by years of memories. "He's gone," she whispered. "Yes," I said. But he's not the one I'm thinking about. She looked at me. Grandpa, I said. He waited. He warned us. And now we've finally done what he couldn't. She took my hand. You were brave, Charlotte. Braver than me. Braver than he ever was. I nodded, but I wasn't alone. The house felt different without him. Not quieter, just lighter, as if the walls had been holding their breath for years and were finally free to exhale. The day after the arrest, my mother sat at the kitchen table staring at the family photo she'd kept tucked behind a stack of old mail. It was from a Christmas long ago. Grandpa in the center, me on one side, 7 years old and smiling. My father on the other, his hand resting stiffly on my shoulder. She turned the photo over, then placed it face down. What happens now? She asked. We live, I said, without fear, without secrets. She nodded slowly. We sold the farmhouse a month later. It wasn't an easy decision. It had been in our family for 3 generations. But every creaking floorboard, every shadowed corner carried a memory that neither of us wanted to relive. Some homes are meant to be passed down. Others are meant to be left behind. We found a smaller place on the edge of town. A cottage with a garden-white shutters and a wraparound porch. My mother planted lavender in the backyard just like the kind Grandpa used to grow. In the mornings, we sat in the kitchen with our mugs of tea. Sometimes we talked about him, my grandfather, about the way he laughed or the songs he used to hum while trimming the grapevines. But we didn't talk about my father. Not much. Not because we were trying to erase him, but because we had already said everything that needed to be said. The trial came and went. The jury took less than 3 hours. Guilty on both counts: first-degree murder of Paul Walker and attempted murder of Charlotte Walker. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He didn't speak during sentencing. Not a word. Just stared straight ahead like a man who'd stopped pretending to care. I didn't attend the last day of court. I didn't need to. I already had what I came for. Truth, justice, freedom. I focused instead on rebuilding what he had spent decades trying to control my sense of self. I started writing again, not for publishers or agents, just for me. Short pieces, letters I never sent, memories I didn't want to lose. And one day in late spring, I wrote something for my grandfather. A short story, barely 10 pages, about a man who spoke softly and listened deeply, who gave a girl a notebook and told her to fill it with truth. I read it aloud on the porch. My mother sat beside me, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. "He'd be proud of you," she said when I finished. I know, I said. But I'm proud of me too. That surprised her. She smiled. Then she reached over and held my hand. It took a long time to stop watching over my shoulder, to stop jumping when the phone rang, to stop wondering what if. But one day I did. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with fireworks or fanfare. It came in the form of peace. One quiet afternoon, I stood at the edge of the garden looking out over the lavender my mother had just watered. The sun was setting, the sky painted in warm golds and faded pink. A breeze passed through the yard soft and kind. And in that moment, I felt it. Not victory, not triumph, but stillness, a closing of a chapter, and the beginning of something new. I once believed that family was something fixed, unchangeable, like a name carved into stone. But now I know better. Family is not just blood. It's not the stories we tell at birthdays or the photos we hang in the hallway. It's not who raised you or even who loved you once. Sometimes family is the person who stays when the truth comes out. Sometimes it's the one who listens to your silence and still understands what you're trying to say. For years, I thought silence was safety. I thought if I kept quiet, avoided conflict, stayed small, I could protect myself. But silence didn't protect me. It almost got me killed. My father taught me how to stay quiet, how to bottle my feelings, to obey, to accept that love came with conditions, that being too sensitive was a flaw, and that obedience was safer than honesty. But my grandfather taught me something else. He taught me that telling the truth, especially when it's hard, is the only way to survive a lie. His journal saved my life, not because of what it contained, but because it reminded me of who I was before fear took hold, before I started doubting my instincts, before I let guilt and loyalty silence the voice inside me. It took losing him to find myself. It took nearly dying to finally live without fear. And it took my mother's strength, quiet buried, and waiting to show me that even the deepest wounds can begin to heal when two people decide to stop protecting a lie. She and I don't talk about everything that happened, not every day, but there's a new honesty between us, a lightness in our laughter, a strength that wasn't there before. We are not the same people we were before the wine, before the journal, before the truth. We're stronger now, and we're still here. If you're reading this or listening and something inside you is stirring, trust it. If a voice in your gut tells you something isn't right, listen. If someone tells you to let it go, but your heart keeps whispering, look again, look deeper, do it. You don't owe silence to anyone, not to keep peace, not to preserve an image, not even to protect someone you once loved. Truth doesn't destroy families. Lies do. What happened to me could happen to anyone. We want to believe the people closest to us have our best interests at heart. We want to believe love and blood are enough, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who's known you the longest. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is tell someone. Speak. Write it down. Ask the questions no one wants you to ask. Truth doesn't just set you free, it anchors you when everything else is falling apart. I thought uncovering the truth would give me closure, but it didn't. It gave me something better. It gave me clarity. It reminded me who I am. Not just a daughter, not just a survivor, but a woman who walked through fire carrying her mother by the hand and came out standing. And now I live simply, quietly, on my own terms, in a home filled with lavender soft music and books I finally have time to read. Some days are still heavy, but most days I wake up light because I'm no longer afraid of the past. I faced it and I walked through it. That's what I want for you too. Not just justice, but peace.